What's up and welcome into the Berryman Breakdown. I am your host, Brian Berryman, here with you from FantasyLabs to break down the first game of Week 3 between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Cleveland Browns. Guys, this will be a GPP focus video on the DraftKings Thursday Night Football Showdown slate. I'll go over with you the injury report, a position-by-position breakdown, and how you can use FantasyLabs to outmaneuver the field to capture those first-place prizes. Without further ado, let's break it all down. All right, guys, let's start with the injury reports for this week's game. We'll start on the Steelers side of the ball as there isn't too much to talk about. A pretty clean slate for the Steelers with just Devin Bush listed on the injury reports as of recording, which is on Tuesday. He was a limited participant Monday and a full participant on Tuesday, so it looks like the Steelers do not have much to worry about. Different story for the Browns, guys. We have three major concerns and a fourth, which I will get to at the end, that is not listed here. But starting left guard, Joel Bitonio did not participate in practice Monday and Tuesday with a biceps injury. His status for the game is still up in the air. I would think at this point he's probably close to 50-50. Keep an eye on the injury report on Wednesday to see if we can get any more information on his status heading into the game on Thursday, but right now it is not looking good for Joel Bitonio. Jack Conklin is the starting right tackle for this team, who was a limited participant in practice Monday and Tuesday. If I had to guess at this point, I believe he will probably suit up and try to give it a go. Again, check the injury report tomorrow or on Wednesday, and see if we can get some more information heading into kickoff on Thursday for Jack Conklin. If both Bitonio and Conklin are out, that is definitely going to impact how the Browns will choose to attack this game. With two starters on the offensive line, you're definitely going to see a little less explosion off of the line of scrimmage, and you're going to not have as many open holes for Chubb and Kareem Hunt to work on. So definitely keep an eye on the injury report heading into Wednesday and up to kickoff on Thursday. Jadeveon Clowney did not participate Monday and Tuesday. The Browns have already ruled him out for the game. And a huge one that is not listed here is Myles Garrett. And thank you to Mary Kay Cabot for posting the full injury report here on Twitter. But he did not participate in practice on Tuesday. A huge one to keep an eye on with the loss already of Clowney. If they are down, Jadeveon Clowney and Myles Garrett, the Steelers are going to catch a huge break there and will definitely impact how the game plays out. So keep an eye on all of those key injuries heading into kickoff on Thursday. All right, let's move into how Vegas is seeing this game. This game opened as a 40.5 point total with the Browns favored by 2.5 points. Since the open of this line, the line has moved drastically over the 3-point threshold that we look for and into Browns minus 4.5. And the over-under has dropped 2 points to 38.5. So we can see how the public is seeing this game. Not much faith in the Steelers offense, who have just mustered 37 total points through 2 games. Mitchell Trubisky has struggled to put the Steelers into scoring position enough. And the public is seeing the Browns controlling this game in a low-scoring affair. All right, let's move into the position groups for each team. The running backs from the Steelers are definitely anchored by Najee Harris, who is off to a pretty disappointing start. Through 2 games, we're just over 100 total yards from scrimmage and only 1 touchdown on over 30 touches. His target count did increase last week from 2 targets in week 1 up to 6 targets in week 2, so that is definitely a positive. But in general, the production just hasn't been there. For you season-long fantasy owners, this is definitely a disappointing start. But for us in the daily fantasy scene, we really do need to continue to keep an eye on this production. It doesn't appear that Najee is healthy at this point. He's been dealing with some nagging injuries now for a bit. The Steelers' offensive line is pretty putrid, but at the same time, we should be getting some more scrimmage yardage from a guy with this sort of workload. So keep an eye on that, but he should get a healthy dose of touches in this game. And like I said, without Clowney and Garrett potentially for the Browns, it could open up some opportunities for Harris to get some chunky yardage. So this is definitely a nice get-right spot, and they are catching the Browns not at full strength. So Najee Harris, definitely RB1 in Pittsburgh still, but in general, this offense has had trouble moving the ball, so something to keep an eye on. As far as the wide receivers are concerned, Deontay Johnson is your clear alpha dog at wide receiver 1 through 2 games, 22 targets, 13 receptions. He's definitely going to be approaching that 10 target range, I would say, on a weekly basis, so long as he stays healthy. But the problem is, which a lot of receivers in Chicago will also tell you, is Mitchell Trubisky is throwing him the ball. It just doesn't seem like there is that much chemistry there to start off the year. He's getting fed a good amount of targets, but the production just hasn't been there quite yet. I would say stick with Deontay. He's, especially in a game like this that's going to be ugly, he's going to be one of the best point per dollar plays on the slate. The opportunities will continue to pile up for him. And at his price tag here, let's flip over to the flex so we can see 9,200 is more than fair for this sort of production that we should see out of Deontay Johnson. Expect another 10 target game for him. The wide receiver room is rounded out by Chase Claypool. He is the clear wide receiver 2, 6 targets in each of the first 2 games, so 12 targets total. He does get involved in the rushing game as well, as they like to run end arounds to him to kind of keep the defense off balance, but the receiving production, again, has just not been there. A total of 44 yards through 2 games. Not going to get it done. I would, again, look to... These numbers will improve, definitely. He's not going to stay at the 6 target and 20 yard per game throughout the rest of the season. However, the slow start is definitely concerning and something to keep an eye on. The wide receiver room is rounded out by rookie George Pickens, who has really struggled to kind of get a foothold in this offense. I understand it's a crowded receiver room. Those 2 guys are very talented, but only 6 targets through 2 games. 2 catches for 26 yards. A very, very talented player who flashed in the preseason. He will definitely carve out a role in this offense as the year progresses. I am sure of that. He is too talented not to. I don't know if week 3 is the time for that, but he will be low owned and someone to definitely keep an eye on, as he could unlock some production down here at a 4,800 price tag. The wide receiver 2, de facto wide receiver 2 in this offense, though, is Paul Freiermuth. Through 2 games, he has just racked up a lot of targets. We have 17 targets, 9 receptions, approaching 100 yards, and a touchdown through 2 games. So Trubisky and Freiermuth appear to have some nice chemistry through 2 weeks. I would definitely consider Freiermuth the wide receiver 2 option on this team, or I guess the receiver 2, if you want to call it that. But I love the spot that he is in going against this Browns defense that has been mediocre, I would say, through last year and into the start of this season. They did give up 31 points last week to the Jets in a kind of a wild finish. But at 7K, I'm definitely going to have some Paul Freiermuth exposure on this slate, because it's just overall, the landscape of this slate is pretty ugly. So anytime you can get a guy who has approached 10 targets in back-to-back games, it's definitely worth considering at a 7K price tag. All right, let's move on to the Browns side of the ball. Nick Chubb is the clear alpha in this offense. Back-to-back games with over 20 opportunities. Last week, he carved up the Jets for 3 touchdowns, 3 targets, 3 receptions. So, he's going to be getting the ball a hefty amount of the time, especially getting a lot of the goal line work. But I don't want to over-exaggerate how involved he is in this offense, because we do have a clear split in work when it comes to the running back room, because Kareem Hunt is getting a lot of run. They tend to give these guys, somewhat equal carries. I would say with a little lean towards Nick Chubb getting 60% of the work and Kareem Hunt getting 40% of the work. But as you can see, back-to-back weeks with double-digit rushing attempts, and he has 6 targets on the year. So Kareem Hunt is going to be heavily involved in this offense throughout the course of the year. Yes, Nick Chubb is a workhorse. He will get most of the goal line work, but Kareem Hunt is definitely involved, and both are in play on this ugly-looking slate. The wide receiver room, Amari Cooper leads the way for the Browns through 2 weeks. He is leading them in targets with 16. He had 9 catches on 10 targets last week against the Jets, good for 100 yards and a touchdown. Him and Donovan Peoples-Jones are going to be the 2 Cleveland Browns pass catchers that we want to be most heavily owned with, I would say. DPJ had 11 targets week 1. And then followed just by 1 target last week. A good reason for that was the emergence of Harrison Bryant and David Njoku taking up a lot of the targets. Harrison Bryant had 4 targets last week. Njoku had, 5. So that's 9 targets right there just between those 2 tight ends. So I would look for Donovan Peoples-Jones to be more involved in this game script for sure. 1 target is definitely a fluke performance. He should be receiving close to 5 to 7 opportunities, I would say, in this game. And at 5,400 is a solid option for the Cleveland Browns. I talked briefly about Njoku and Harrison Bryant. They are splitting the work so far on the year. We need to keep an eye on Harrison Bryant's injury status. He was a limited participant on Tuesday. If he ends up, for whatever reason, not playing on Thursday, David Njoku becomes an excellent play at 5,200, as he will be getting all of the tight end work instead of a little bit of a split that's going on right now between Njoku and Bryant. All right, let's pull up the FantasyLabs correlation matrix for this week. For those of you who aren't aware, essentially what this is a correlation matrix that is based on the FantasyLabs simulation engine. Every week for every game, we run the simulation of the game thousands of times. This helps with our projections as well as figuring out which players are most correlated to each other on an individual game or an individual slate. This week, I wanted to talk through this very briefly, as the highest correlation on the entire slate by a wide margin here is Jacoby Brissett and Amari Cooper. I would expect this tandem to be the highest scoring of the 2 throughout this entire correlation chart a good amount of the time. But there are some obvious other players that we need to be considering when it comes to this. In particular, Donovan Peoples-Jones, who has the second highest correlation on the board at a 0.36. Followed by Harrison Bryant, which I talked about. The negative correlations we need to be aware of. This is pretty basic, but for those maybe who are just starting to play Showdown, ideally we don't want to pair the opposing quarterback with the opposing defense. As you can see, the negative correlation here at negative 0.47 is a screaming stop sign. We do not want to be doing that. On the Steelers side of the ball, the leading correlation is between Mitch Trubisky and Deontay Johnson, which I had already touched on a bit. Mitch seems to be forcing the ball to Deontay. He is the best receiver on this team, but at the end of the day, it's him and Paul Freiermuth who are going to be the 2 best options in the Steelers' passing attack, and these are the 2 highest correlations here on the board. We will be wanting to keep this in mind when we are building our rules on the FantasyLabs optimizer for our contest on Thursday night. Some of the rules that I will be building for this week, let's get into the FantasyLabs optimizer, one of the most powerful optimizers on the market when it comes to daily fantasy sports. The first one I'm going to want to be doing here is in any lineups that will include Jacoby Brissett. As my captain, I'm going to want to make sure that I am pairing him with at least 2 of his pass catchers. So the 2 that I mentioned that I really want to have exposure to are Amari Cooper, Donovan Peoples-Jones. and David Njoku. If I know for sure that Harrison Bryant is going to play, I'll probably add him to this rule. But for right now, these are the three that I want to make sure I'm getting a good amount of combinations in when I'm making my lineups with Jacoby Brissett as the captain. I will do the same here for Mitch Trubisky. When you're making these rules, make sure you are picking the right either captain or flex, because it's definitely going to impact how the optimizer builds them. So we're going to want to do at least two from the receiving core for the Steelers, who I talked about. Freiermuth and Deontay Johnson are my favorite two, followed closely by Chase Claypool. And I am going to put George Pickens in here this week because I do think he is eventually going to start to carve out a larger role in this offense. And I would rather be early on that than late, especially when we're talking about a lower ownership and price on Pickens this week. So that's a rule that I'm going to start off with. I'm also going to make sure, I kind of talked in this earlier, we can add a secondary rule here, which is I don't want to have any of the Steelers defense in any of my Jacoby Brissett captain lineups. So we'll add rule and do in lineups that include any of Jacoby Brissett, use at least two of Cooper, Peoples-Jones, and Njoku, and exactly zero of the Steelers defense. We are not going to want to be putting them in any lineups. Man, I can't type. In any lineups that are with Jacoby Brissett as the captain. I will add that same rule on the opposite side. We do not want to have any Browns defense in any lineups that have Mitch Trubisky as the captain. So this is a good example of some of the correlation rules that I'll just use to start off some of these lineups. As I continue to get the lineup spitting out, I'll go back in here and add additional rules. One that I do like to use pretty frequently, especially in large field tournaments with 100,000 plus people, we need to make sure that our lineups are differentiated. We do not want to have duplication of lineups as it cuts into our EV. I touched on that a little bit last week. If you have any questions on some game theory stuff, feel free to shoot me a DM. But a good way to differentiate your lineups is just have one guy, have at least one player where projected ownership is less than 10%. So I'm going to add that in here as well. We don't have projected ownership numbers quite yet. It is still early in the week. Like I said, I'm recording this video on Tuesday. But by tomorrow night, Wednesday, we will definitely have those ownership numbers in there for you. And you'll want to make sure that you are playing some single-digit owned players to keep your lineups different from the rest of the field. So as you can see in some of these lineups with the rules that I had built, any lineups that include Jacoby Brissett as captain, we will have at least two of Cooper, Peoples-Jones, or Njoku. These rules seem to be checking out okay. Here's another one here. Yep, this one looks good. So it looks to be spitting out correctly in some of the lineups that I'm looking at. I don't like how some of them are spitting out. I don't want any Chase Claypool captains. I think that is just a little thin of a play. I'm not going to bash the play. If you feel like it's a good play, go ahead and do it. But for me, wrong. I want to do captain. We're going to unselect all, and then we're just going to reselect the guys who I am considering for captain at this point in the week, which is going to be Deontay, Chubb, Brissett, and Trubisky. For now, this may change. This is just more so for demonstration purposes. So when we see any Trubisky lineups at captain, like this one here, perfect. It's spitting out two pass catchers, which is what we want. The rules seem to be appropriate. Okay, let's talk briefly about the game theory angle of this game. I want to take you guys through the thought process that I use when I'm starting to look at the slate from a macro perspective before I start diving into how I want to differentiate myself from the field. In my opinion, Nick Chubb is going to be the highest owned captain. Again, we don't have ownership numbers yet, but coming off of the recency bias 3-touchdown game, the workhorse of this Cleveland Browns offense in a favored environment at home, he's going to be the highest owned captain a majority of the time. So I think most lineups are going to start in some way, shape, or form with Nick Chubb, Deontay Johnson in the flex, probably either Jacoby Brissett or Mitch Trubisky. So in this build, I'll put Mitch in there, and then we will probably have Amari Cooper potentially Donovan Peoples-Jones, but for the chalk build, I want to stick with this. So we can expect a lot of lineups to look like this, guys. How are we going to put ourselves in position to capitalize on a game script that doesn't favor this setup here for the lineups? If a majority of our competition is going to be building their lineups in this general construct here, how can we be different while not giving up a ton of projected points here? A great way, in my opinion, this week is to bet on a game script that the Steelers not only keep it close, but go into Cleveland and win this game. So I love having Mitch Trubisky as a captain this week. I don't think he's going to be a popular choice at captain this week. And with the rushing upside that he has, I think in a game environment that is sort of ugly on paper, he is a great option. I would bet his captain ownership is going to be less than 10%. By making Mitch Trubisky your captain, you're automatically differentiating yourself from the field, and you're also betting on a game script that is going to take Nick Chubb out of the game when it comes to having a ceiling performance. Now, obviously, there's a game where both teams score a lot of points. Nick Chubb scores a lot of points. Mitch scores a lot of points. But what Vegas is telling us here is that game script is very unlikely. So why don't we just build for a game script that may still be sort of ugly, but the Steelers control the game? So that's just one way to think about how we can differentiate ourselves from the field, because there is going to be a majority of our competition that's building in a certain way. Let's build it a little bit differently. So in this lineup, like I talked about with you guys, I'm going to want to make sure that I am putting 2 pass catchers in with Mitch Trubisky. We talked about the correlations of Deontay Johnson and Paul Freiermuth. So in this game script where Mitch and Deontay Johnson seem to be going off, there is a potential here that we could put an onslaught on the Steelers. Again, we're not talking about what is most likely to happen. We're talking about if a certain game script breaks out, how can we put ourselves to be the most profitable in that circumstance? So I'm going to add in this roster, I think it makes a ton of sense. In large field GPP only, I'm going to add George Pickens to this roster. This is going to give me a lower owned captain who's still highly capable of putting up great numbers. As we see, he's the fourth highest projected player on the slate. While mixing in George Pickens, who will likely be under 10% owned, maybe around the 15% mark at best. This is going to give the start of this roster a great differentiation against the field. From here, you can essentially use whoever you want. If you want to bet on Nick Chubb, that's fine. I think in this roster, putting Kareem Hunt in here and then having 8,500 to fill out the rest of your roster should be perfectly different. It should be enough differentiation here to give you guys a chance at first place if this game script breaks out. Now, this is just one of the many different ways that I'll be thinking about this game and how I could use a different go against the grain, you could say. If this game script breaks out, I am competing against less players than I would if I started the roster in the way that I had put before with Nick Chubb at captain. So I hope some of that makes sense. I'm trying to kind of get you guys thinking in a game theory way. We can't just do the same things that the field is doing, because then your rosters are just going up and down with the majority of the competition, and you're never giving yourself a chance to actually catapult your lineup into first place. So think about the different ways that you think this game can play out. If that game script does happen to break out, how are we going to put our lineups in the best position to take advantage of it? All right, guys. That's going to do it for this week. Go ahead and give me a follow on Twitter if you don't already. I would greatly appreciate it. My Twitter handle is at 13ERRYMAN. It is just Berryman without the B. It is a 13 instead of the B. So would appreciate that, guys. If you have any question on the game theory, anything like that, go ahead and leave a comment below here in the YouTube video, or you can DM me on Twitter. Be happy to have a conversation and help you guys out in any way that I can. Appreciate you guys tuning in here, and we will see you next week on the Berryman Breakdown. Thanks, guys.